This week on The Futurists, Pablos Holman.
On average, an American gets 9 times as much energy as a typical Earthling. So, what does that mean? Americans are the closest thing we have to unconstrained humans.
One of the biggest, craziest estimates that's coming out right now is that by 2050, there's likely to be, 1.2 to 1.6 billion eco-refugees, people displaced by climate. And, if you look at the recent wildfires in California and the rising cost of extreme weather events, hurricanes and so forth, Superstorm Sandy, etc., it's estimated that by the middle of next decade, the cost of extreme weather losses will be about the same as what the US pays on military expenses.
Now, we spend a lot on military.
Yeah, over $1 trillion, right?
So the idea is 1.6 billion eco-refugees or climate refugees by when?
2050.
By 2050, so 25 years.
Yeah. So 25 years.
And the examples we have so far are like Katrina-type things and California wildfires.
Yeah, the biggest problem is food scarcity, right?
Food scarcity.
Yeah,
What are good examples of food scarcity?
So a lot of the southern border pressure in the US is arguably because of food scarcity, because you have in Ecuador and places like that, where, Guatemala, etc., where the big influx is coming from, that they have already seen their staple crops lose viability because the increases in temperature there are enough that it's super sensitive to temperature change. Those crops then have issues growing. So that's at least, the UN has estimated up to 120 million of the refugees last year displaced peoples were displaced in part by climate.
Well, I haven't studied this particular issue directly. I could make up some random. I could make up some observations.
But let's talk about the tech that could solve.
Right. So if you think
problems,
this through,
right?
You've got, like California wildfires is probably not a representative. I don't know how many people are displaced by that. Something like a few tens of thousands.
Yes.
Okay. And so that doesn't register in the 1 billion number. The if you look at Central American,
Bangladesh going underwater, you've got a lot of the Pacific Islands.
Is Bangladesh going underwater? Or is it just a projection?
Projection by 2100. So I don't know how common the flooding will be in the 2050s.
Yeah, there is a bit of a weird problem where humans are overwhelmingly attracted to settling by the coasts.
Yes.
And I get that there's like some...
Well, we used to do trade with ships.
Yeah, you used to do trade with ships, and ports were a meaningful employer and that kind of thing. So now I think we do it just because of a romantic idea of being near the water. But I don't know that there's necessarily that we should take it for granted that that's the right place for people to live.
Yeah.
And, when you look at situations like New Orleans, I don't want to say that they had it coming, but it's not like you can't guess that there's going to be another hurricane there.
Yeah. And Miami is the same, right?
Miami too, exactly. Yeah. It's like, let's just spend as much as possible in the most vulnerable spot. So,
yeah, exactly.
And I think there's there's different cultural dynamics that sort of make people want to do that. And some people, I think, like living on the edge, and that's why they do it, or they want to. It's expensive because you can sort of afford to say that or afford to express that you can afford to lose this or whatever. I don't know. So there's some of that stuff going on, but by and large, that's got to be a small fraction of the number in what they call eco-refugees, I guess. So if you take it as a representative example, what's going on in Central American countries, okay, if there's a food scarcity problem, and again, I'm totally making it up here, but there's a food scarcity problem that's attributed to temperatures rising, making crops not viable, then, that has happened in a lot of places. And there is a sort of long-term adaptation cycle, where you have to figure out what does grow here now.
Correct.
And maybe they can scale up and do avocados or something that Californians pay a lot for. But so I think it's not that there's not an option. They still have fertile land. And yeah, of course, it sucks to have your industry damaged, and I'm not trying to belittle anyone's situation. But if you look at one of those places and say, okay, well, if we were starting from scratch today, what would we do? You would probably have a whole bunch of crops that you could do there instead. And so the question is less about, is it impossible to live here? And it's more about, is our old industry, our old way of life, our old expectation and normal something that we can continue to expect to work? And I think in a lot of ways that's just never true anywhere.
Yeah.
And so people go down kicking and screaming, and again, need a lot of compassion for people who weren't in a position.
But I mean, we're getting to the point
but yeah.
in places like Texas and California and New South Wales and Victoria, where I'm from in Australia, as examples, where the grids are failing in extreme heat zones and stuff like that. So so it's not it's clearly running out of steam. So really, it doesn't really matter if you're having an argument over fossil fuels versus solar or nuclear generation, for example. We are going to have to adapt the grid. And the reality is, solar and wind are magnitudes cheaper than coal and gas. So, it's probably cheaper these days to build an entirely new solar farm than it is just to service an existing coal plant, right?
Well, I have a heterodox view of this, I guess, because when I look at the cost of a solar plant or a wind farm, I add in the cost of the coal or nat gas plant you have to build to run when the wind's not blowing. Nobody else wants to do that. And so, unfortunately, if you do look at those numbers combined, you're looking at a super efficient wind farm, but you end up with months at a time where there's no wind. And in that period, you still need power, and there's no storage that lasts for months.
Yeah.
And so the storage that you use is coal, or increasingly in places, natural gas. And the problem there is you're building a nat gas plant or a coal plant, but you're building the least economic plant possible, because you're building one that's going to run more intermittently than ever before. You're building one that's going to sit around most of the time, not running, in order to compensate for So I'm not very bullish on wind farms at all, and I'm also, as much progress as we've made with solar panels, it's exciting. I mean, I love solar panels, but I think we've sort of over-indexed on them as a solution, and I really don't see that. I don't,
Let's talk about what we're working on in terms of next generation energy. The stuff that you're involved in is pretty interesting.
Well, I think the reason, I should say before we do that, and we can, the reason I don't get excited about scaling up wind and solar is, so there's two things. One, I don't see the miraculous energy storage solution that stores energy from summer to winter. I don't see it coming. It's possible that, other people are more bullish on this than me. Actually, almost everyone is. But so to me, I think it's a red herring.
Reactors.
I want to solve baseload energy, which means 24/7, 365. And if you do that, and if you think about where's the demand coming from, these days you see everyone freaking out about the demand from data centers and hyperscalers, and that increased demand is computers. Well, those computers don't run when the sun's shining. They run 24/7, because you got to amortize the cost of your GPU over 24 hours a day, not 8. So to me, we've done a lot to bring the cost of solar down. It's been very helpful in a lot of places. We should celebrate that and acknowledge it, but we should not allow ourselves to be fooled into thinking that this is going to be a solution. And, just to be as, big as possible about this, like what I do is I typically show Germany's numbers because they're the ones who got the most ahead of this. They're the ones who invested the most in trying to scale up solar. They deliberately shut down their nuclear reactors. They chose solar. I don't know if you've been to Germany in the winter, but the sun don't shine. And so what's happening is everybody who's excited about solar, brags about Germany's deployment. And if you look at their numbers, it's astounding. It went from 40 to 50 to 60 gigawatts of deployed solar, which is incredible. But they never talk about the capacity factor. So if you go look at how much energy is actually delivered by those deployments, in the best case scenario, noontime in the summer, on a great day, they're getting 20% of that. Again, 20% of what they paid for, 20% of what's in the headlines, 20% of what they brag about. And in the winter, it's down to 2 or 3%. So we're lying to ourselves. This is not going to work. It's not a solution. So I can't accept it until I see that change, and I don't see it changing. So that's where I'm coming from on this. And then the other reason that I'm, way out on one end of a spectrum about renewable energy is that I think the demand curve is also a lie. People show a demand curve of, a few percent a year of growth in energy demand, and that's a lie. Have you ever seen a oil and gas company advertise to get you to buy more gas in your lifetime? That's never happened once. Like Chevron doesn't have ads that are like, with like
Drive more.
Yeah, with like the Marlboro man saying like, "Hey, buy more gas." Yeah, it doesn't happen.
Good for the economy.
Exactly. Like gas is good for you. It's just it doesn't even exist because demand is essentially unlimited. Why is it unlimited? I think we've talked about this before, but the simplest example I've ever found, Nathan Myhrvold, who I used to work for, came up with this. He said, "Look, if you add up all of the energy for a single average human on Earth, that's going to be equivalent to one toaster. So Americans get 8 bonus toasters. So that means, on average, an American gets 9 times as much energy as a typical Earthling. So, what does that mean? Americans are the closest thing we have to unconstrained humans, right? Americans get whatever we want. We get to drive cars and motorcycles and fly planes and helicopters and to go base jumping and whatever the hell we want to do. So, not saying we're role models. I'm just saying we're unconstrained on energy, and as close as you get to that. I'm probably not a median American, so who knows? I'm probably in the 20, 30, 40 toaster range. But the point being, the goal that a lot of people have in their mind, I believe, is that we're going to somehow get Americans back down to 1. And I don't believe that is reasonable at all. I believe the real goal is how do you get every human on Earth as much energy as you give an American?
Sure.
How do you make 9 toasters for every?
And how do you do that without wrecking the environment?
So that would be about 10x global energy production. Yeah. So 10x is not what anyone else is saying is the target. I believe is the target. So if we just take that for a minute and pick it apart, say, all right, where's that energy? How ridiculous would that be? Well, first thing to know is that in the last century, we 10x global energy production.
Right.
Now, obviously, we did that by burning more crap. So coal, gas, oil. Probably don't want to 10x that stuff.
Right. That's not sustainable.
Well, that's the very definition of what we would say is not sustainable.
Right.
Okay. It might be possible, and we may prove it very soon. Thanks to
And it has the only side effect is the extinction of the human species potentially.
there you go. So it's a weird thing where our knee-jerk reaction is to say it's not sustainable. But for fun, let's pick that apart. Why isn't it sustainable? Well, one, you got the mining impact. Like just, there is some not totally, totally ignorable amount of environmental damage from, drilling, transporting, refining, and distributing oil and gas around. So, that's a start.
50% of the world's shipping currently is energy. 51%
Is
technically is shipping energy resources.
51% of the ships
So,
on the
you know,
ocean
and-
are moving gas and oil around.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So you have all that, but if those ships were electric, then, or as I often suggest, they should be sailing.
Yep.
Then it's basically free and clean. So why wouldn't you do that? But the problem with burning all this crap, essentially the only problem is emissions. So if you burn crap, you make a bunch of screwy molecules. It'd be nice if you were just making CO2.
compounds.
It'd be nice if you were just making CO2, but you're not. You're making a big mix of screwy molecules, as I like to call them. So you wouldn't want to be releasing those into the same air that everybody's breathing.
Yeah.
So if you could contain that, and we have improved on that a lot with things like catalytic converters in cars. And we don't do them universally or globally, but we do have a way of improving on that. And then the second one, of course, is you got your CO2 and methane emissions that would be also considered detrimental to the atmosphere. So if you could contain those things, or
extract them from
the atmosphere, then actually burning these fuels wouldn't be so bad unless we ran out. Like it is possible that the Earth is actually just made of oil under there, and we just got to keep drilling deeper, and it will last forever. But it is also unlikely. So you might want to make, and this is where if you could make biofuels, as we call them, but that's basically, go grab hydrogen and carbon and stick it together and into something and maybe you extract it from the air, you extract it from other places, and you go make a liquid fuel that you could then use, and the end-to-end cycle would be sustainable. That's possible, right? And so it's the kind of thing where I think it's sort of worth getting all of these things in your head, because in the long run, the reasons that you and I exist partially includes burning fossil fuels. We wouldn't be here without that. And
I mean, but you can respect that as something that's got us here. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get us to where we're going.
Totally. And maybe the thing to do going forward is let's save those, especially if they're limited, and we don't really know, but it looks like, there's some that we should treat them as precious, things we aren't making yet. So we don't make gas, so let's treat it as precious, use it for the things that we can't do with electricity and that we can't do with other forms. I think that's a...
But I mean, I think we should be having the same attitude towards fishing, commercial fishing, and towards wildlife in general, things like that.
Balance it out. If you're gonna take the fish, then plant more. Just plant trees that you cut. There ought to be some easily done. It's that. There's just arithmetic there. You don't need Navier-Stokes to solve that. You cut a tree, you plant a tree. How hard is it? Something like that should be done for fish and for fuel, and I think that these things could be just managed in a really good way going forward. If we get to a point where we have take the solar farms, I would on solar farms so much if we were using them to go make clean hydrogen or ammonia or whatever, go use those things to make the fuels that we need, that we want. And then, that to me makes some sense. But there's a problem, which is that people have this kind of, you know, simplistic view of fossil fuels. I mean, look, I think we've even gone overboard vilifying the oil industry. It's like they exist because you demand oil. Full stop. Now, there might be some bad behavior and some fraudulent and some, and some things that need to be improved in those industries, like any industry. But the fundamental job of extracting oil and delivering it for people is not only saving lives, it's like it's so important. It's why you exist. So to me, I don't think it buys us a lot to vilify the oil industry for what they do. How they do it, that's a different issue. And maybe they need to be, cleaning up their act. And we've certainly seen bad behavior there, but we need an oil industry. And so until we can make the better solution, I think it's people are going overboard, kind of trying to place the blame somewhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, in reality, our energy needs are changing, so we're going to have to solve it. There's no real choice. And,
Yep.
We are making transitions where it matters, like electric vehicles and, vertical farming and stuff like that, for some of this. The EVs are interesting. China has come out of nowhere to be now, 40% of motor vehicle production around the world. And just being here in Bangkok, I'm sure you've seen all the electric
They're all electric
Chinese cars on the road. Yes, all over.
I haven't seen any Teslas, but I've seen BYD.
Yeah, there's a few Teslas, but BYD and Zeekr and Geely and all those guys are here, and they're making
They're no compromise.
No, but they aren't. I travel in them like using Grab, which is the Uber equivalent here. They're great vehicles. Really,
is there a
together?
Just because I don't know, we're in, I guess for listeners, we're hanging out on your deck in Bangkok, and if you contrast Bangkok with I don't know, a good example is Shenzhen, which is a much newer city, but it's like almost entirely electric. All the scooters in Shenzhen are electric. Here, I don't think I've seen more than one electric scooter.
No, they're only just starting now. It's partially, there's not charging stations, so it's if they want to get serious about EVs, but there's so many EVs coming, so you do see now all of the shopping centers have charging stands, and they're always fully allocated. So I think the demand for charging stations is pretty high.
And then there's some local initiative to bury all these cables, for all the power cables.
Correct, yeah.
And then so presumably upgrade the grid to handle.
Yeah, and they're also working on runaway flow, overflow ponds and things like that for flooding and diverting techniques and things like that, because they have got some problems with flooding.
So here's an interesting one. You go for the futurists. You just said, it's sort of, I don't know exactly how you said it, but it's sort of surprising or astounding that China is doing so much of the EV production. And that seems like it would have actually been a really easy conclusion to forecast. If almost at any point, probably from the day that Tesla shipped a Model S, you could have said, all right, what's the future of EVs and EV production? And it wouldn't have been hard to figure out that China was going to be from China. I mean, did anybody figure
there was actually interesting debate on that.
Oh, okay.
And of course they were able to compete far quicker than people anticipated. But people anticipated they would get into the game, but what they didn't, part of the problem you've got is sort of the American view generally of Chinese innovation is, well, they steal all the designs, IP from the US, and then they improve the production capabilities. But what's actually happening in China now, which Kai-Fu Lee talks about and so forth, is that actually the innovation in China is a lot more aggressive. And so in some areas, patent production and things like that, China seems to have at least caught up with the US, and on EVs, they're clearly surpassed on solar deployment. They've surpassed the US, and so forth. So there is, industrial level automation in Shenzhen is another great example. The automation of the traffic and emergency, resources there. The automation of government systems and things like that. Shenzhen is an amazing example of city level AI, adoption and industrial level.
Look, city level surveillance is incredible. If you're a visitor like me, you feel like a toddler because like my girlfriend has to basically shepherd me around and buy me lunch and stuff because I can't pay for anything. They don't take credit cards. I don't have my version of WeChat won't let me pay. I can't even buy lunch at McDonald's in Shenzhen. But I was gonna say you mentioned the EV production in China. If you look, it's kind of like right now there's this sort of classically American sort of argument going on about EVs are, you know, not the panacea that everybody claims they are, and because historically the auto industry was a big deal in America, it's one of these sort of political footballs where they kind of say, you know, we got to rebuild American manufacturing, and automotive is the place to start, and they want to like make it America into an automotive manufacturing center again, and the way to, and like it's not about EVs. It's like Ford and Chevy are like, no, we're making internal combustion engines again, and this is what's happening. And so, is China making ICE
No,
cars
because
or all electric?
well, you have to put it in context
Yeah.
of the problems they had in, the biggest political crisis in China. Well, there's a few. There's obviously been the student protest in the 80s, but and more recently you've had the real estate market and the tech, the pushback against the tech billionaires and so forth. But prior to that, there was a fairly significant political shift in Beijing, with people basically that said we're not going to put up with this pollution anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And that was a significant risk to the CCP power base, because the tide had shifted, where their messaging was, no, it's fine, the air quality is great, and people just in the end, like, and this doesn't happen today. I mean, the Chinese people love the Chinese government and
the
trust it.
CCP got on board with solving
But they got on board with solving it. And so as part of that, then, there is a broad regulatory imperative to move to EVs. So in Beijing and Shanghai today, you see different colored number plates. And so if you've got a green number plate, right, green with white lettering, I think it is, versus the white with blue, or the blue and white lettering, the blue and the white is ICE vehicles, and the green is EVs. The green vehicles travel on the roads toll-free. Right, and the tolls are higher for the combustion vehicles.
Got it.
There's congestion charge for the cities for internal combustion engines and so.
But presumably the EV industry in China is going, but vast majority towards electric.
Now, yes, it's vastly electric, and to be honest, the view of the Chinese people to the American approach to vehicles is that it's ridiculous how primitive their vehicles are, right? Because, the other thing is you've got, electric vehicles are massively more, they have less maintenance issues.
Right.
And then, now with the tech they're throwing at this stuff, these vehicles with the electric vehicles, what they can do, it's insane, So, a Chinese would view that strategy by the US as very rearward looking. Right? And just
I mean, I do too, for that matter, but I mean, I'm excited about getting to buy a big bore V8 again, but but
So my dream is to
I know it'll be my last one.
No, my dream is to resto mod a 1977 911 Porsche.
Oh wow, that's what you're into.
Into
That's an affliction.
with Tesla EV and
Oh,
modern running gear
oh,
and
I
everything.
see, yeah.
So Tesla motors, but modern suspension.
No, you could
and-
do it. I mean, I'm sure that's getting easier every day.
Yeah, for sure.
That's going to be an expensive custom job, but
Yeah, but as we
Cool.
were talking about, it's maybe achievable.
yeah, that'll be fun.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
We haven't really talked about what comes next on
Okay,
the
so
energy front, and
Let's
because I know this is one of your specialties.
Yeah, I mean, it started for me because, I don't know, almost, about 18 years ago, something like that. We'd started the Intellectual Ventures Lab to invent for these kinds of things. And one of the things we took on was energy. And the presumption for us was that, we'll invent, cool battery tech or better solar panels or something. And so, we had a very, fundamental mindset about problems. So we would really try to break them down and just start with basic arithmetic. How big is the problem? And when you start adding up the size of the problem for energy, anyone can do this. You don't have to be, you don't need to be a professor. You just get a napkin and a Sharpie and start adding up how much energy is needed, and you'll pretty quickly get something like the 10 toaster thing I described earlier. And so when you see the problem that way, it as we did, it just sort of steered us towards solving the greater problem. It's like, all right, how do you solve for baseload? How do you solve for the global scale of the problem? We're trying to save the world, not just America. So we need something that's going to work. So that pretty quickly steered us toward, and we did work on batteries and other things for a while, but it heavily steered us towards nuclear reactors. And fortunately, we had some inventors on our team that had been involved in reactor development at Lawrence Livermore, and we have the kind of people around who had a lot of experience and a good start on this. So we revisited kind of the history of nuclear reactors and figured out some of these technologies that had been sort of, I'd say, like dabbled in previously, had a lot more potential than had ever been developed. And so we started to try to see if we could make it make sense to develop a better type of nuclear reactor. And we built this team, which we actually spun out pretty early as a company called TerraPower. And a lot of people have heard of TerraPower because this is the most modern nuclear reactor technology, you could say. It's called a traveling wave reactor. And this is a reactor that is essentially powered by nuclear waste. And the TerraPower reactor, you start with uranium left over from enriching fuel for today's reactors, or from making bombs, which is where most of it came from. So we have a lot of uranium just laying around, and it's low grade, not very radioactive stuff. It's in giant stockpiles, and we have enough of that to power the entire planet, including growth for like 1,000 years in stockpiles. You don't even have to mine uranium. You just have to build a reactor that can put it to use. So we were very excited about this. And as you can see, like I said, that was 17, 18 years ago, and we still don't have a TerraPower reactor. that we don't have a traveling wave reactor. And the reason for that is that in our lifetime, when you and I were kids, the world just sort of conflated nuclear reactors with nuclear bombs. We outlawed the wrong one,
Yeah.
and we built the other one. And we scared the shit out of ourselves. We got these mushroom clouds in our heads. We got this scary story in our heads, and we got on the wrong fork in history. And we're still not being honest with ourselves about that. And it's really time to change it. And so
So
what
you've got
happened-
thorium,
well,
potentially, and then
we could talk about that too.
next gen fusion, tokamaks and stuff.
Yeah, let's do that. But let me just frame this a little more. So anyway, so the TerraPower reactor suffered from this sort of regulatory black hole that had been created. We outlawed everything about nuclear reactors in the 80s. We stopped making them in the US. Unfortunately, most of the world, whether they want to or not, follows the US on nuclear policy. Very little nuclear reactor development. Obviously, the only major exceptions, Russia and China. They're on their own
China's
track.
doing a lot of stuff now.
They're amazing, and they're building lots of nuclear reactors, lots of different kinds of nuclear reactors. They're all doing an amazing job with them. They're building them on budget and on time.
Yeah.
1/10 of the
They
cost.
just had an amazing 17-minute run with a fusion reactor. Like, that's insane progress.
Well, I think that's a separate track. But the point being, that's how I got started, and I see the potential there. TerraPower has now built a different kind of reactor that they are approved to build in Wyoming, a molten salt reactor.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very interesting design. So it's a start. And
Gates is promoting that as well, right? The same.
yeah, and that's what they evolved into doing. And Bill Gates is chairman of the company. It's not that the company needed resources; they just needed to be able to do it. And so, what's interesting now in the U.S. is two things have happened. One, I think, with these kinds of problems created by a story, when the story in people's minds was broken, and we were living off the wrong story. Sometimes you can't fix that without just waiting it out. You need generations to pass. And so like kids our kids probably never heard of Chernobyl. Yeah. That's like some Netflix show for old people. It's not even a thing for them. And they're like, you dad, reactors are cool, build them. They want to save the world. So I think there's a kind of inflection point that you sometimes have to wait a couple of generations for. And we just hit it in the US with nuclear reactors. And I think the two other things that really drive that right now, I could have said this last year. This year, it's different than last year. Last year was the same as the 17 years before it, because I've been beating people over the head about nuclear reactors for 17 years, and I can tell you, no change in sentiment. Last year, it all changed since last year. And why? Well, in our lifetime, Congress was probably largely staffed by Chevron and Shell.
Yeah.
So you had the biggest industry in the world was oil. And they had the biggest...
The world's most valuable companies were oil companies.
Exactly right. Now,
the majority of commodities trade was energy.
Yeah.
The majority of shipping is still energy.
Yeah. But now the most valuable companies in the world, hyperscalers.
Yeah.
It's all tech companies.
Yeah.
And those guys all this year realized, holy, to power all these chips we bought from NVIDIA,
we have to hyperscale energy.
We need hyperscale energy. And to do that, it's got to be clean, it's got to be cheap, and it's got to be baseload.
Yeah.
So now, who runs Congress? Who staffs Congress? Biggest lobby, most money comes from tech, not oil. So Congress has flipped. So in April, they passed this huge
Look at Elon. Exactly.
Well, I don't know that Elon gets credit for that one, but
no, but I mean, look at
Advanced
Elon in terms of his involvement in the political.
Oh yeah,
right?
and yeah, so he's helping for sure to drive. He's pushing electrification, which we also need. He's obviously big on solar, but we're also freeing up nuclear. And so the Advance Act is mostly about freeing up nuclear, getting the NRC to approve nuclear reactors. So that's happening. And we're now at a point where we finally get to build and deploy and create new nuclear reactor technology. And it's so exciting. I mean, I think this is the most important thing, and people don't realize is how big of a deal it is. And just to wrap up on this, so we can talk about these other things. We backed a company called Deep Fission, which invented a reactor that'll fit through a manhole, and they bury it a mile deep in a borehole. So this reactor is a mile from anyone's backyard. It's buried under 10 billion tons of rock. It's unquestionably safe. It's based on existing reactor tech that's very well understood. It's the same technology used in the 92 reactors we have running in the US, but it's a new design. And it's small in the sense that, you could build this thing in a factory like a Toyota. It's about the size of a Toyota. We can make thousands of them in factories, and you can get economies of scale, which has never been true for reactors before. And you could bury this thing under a data center, under a skyscraper or a neighborhood, and it's enough power to run those things. And so it's an exciting advancement in making small, what we call SMRs, or small modular reactors, possible. This is in the kind of 15 to 30 megawatt range. And we can just start to make thousands of them, put them everywhere in the world. So to me, that's very exciting because it doesn't rely on weather. It doesn't rely on geology. It doesn't rely on resource extraction. I mean, use uranium, but we have a lot of ways of getting that. It doesn't take, you don't have to mine a lot of uranium. The amount of uranium a reactor will burn to power you for your entire lifetime would fit in a coffee mug. That's how much waste you make if you're powered by a nuclear reactor. If you do it with coal, it's like 140 rail cars full of coal.
Yeah.
It's insane how much waste. So this is an exciting moment because not only do we have the technology, we have the commercial and financial will, and we have the regulatory environment that's going to make all this possible. So that's why now is the moment where I'm most excited about nuclear reactors, even though I've been excited for a long time. Now we finally get to do it. So that's nuclear, and then we can talk about the other things.
Look, I think you're absolutely right that small reactors, next gen reactors, the molten salt thorium reactors, very clear, and the fusion stuff, the tokamak, and those reactors are looking more and more feasible every day. At the same time, I am getting signaling, particularly out of China, that we're going to see incredible advances in battery tech over the next few years. That's not just for applications in things like in transportation. So next generation EVs, even next generation aircraft with better battery density, but also grid level storage, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, like you, I think that we will 10x energy. I think energy will be very low cost, very clean, and we will transition off of the whole fossil fuel things fairly rapidly.
Yeah.
I think nuclear is part of the solution, right?
Yeah.
I do tend to think that if we can get better at the storage stuff, and so the same tech with the molten salt, with the thorium reactors, the same tech can be applied to battery tech, molten salt storage. So some grid level storage could be done with that. That could be pretty interesting. And salt is an extremely common, artifact on the planet, or resource, right? So, and cheap, and again, is fairly friendly. Although,
if you have a reactor, you can do desalination and get your salt for free from the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think we're moving. I think by the 2040s, mid 2040s, we're in a period where we're transitioning to essentially free energy, and we won't have a lot of the concerns we have about the energy systems today. We will mostly have been transitioned off of the hydrocarbon stuff. There may be some legacy infrastructure in place, but to go 10x, you're going to have to deploy new tech, and you're not going to double down on coal, despite what's happening in China with coal plants right now. They are ultimately growing.
Double down on everything.
They're growing alternate sources faster than they are the coal stuff, but yeah. So that's sort of my.
So what are grid scale storage technologies that you think are promising?
Well, I mean, the carbon nanotube use for batteries and stuff like that. That's going to be pretty wild. But right now, you've got battery farms like in South Australia that Tesla built, which are now outperforming their old systems, but they don't have multi-month outages like you were talking about. That seems feasible.
At least they store energy from noon to midnight.
Yeah. But there's not longer term.
I looked this up just a couple weeks ago.
But the molten salt can be up to 3 months.
I think the biggest battery deployment. Oh man, can I remember the numbers? The biggest one is in China. It's not enough energy to power a city through the night.
Yeah. No, I think
the biggest one in the world for grid scale storage can't power a small city through the night.
So the Edwards and Sanborn Solar Plus Storage project in California will be the largest battery farm. 3.3 megawatt hours of battery energy.
Yeah, 3.3 megawatt hours could get maybe Spokane through the night.
Yeah. So I mean, we're still
to that. So to me, it just
I think we're still on.
I think
we're still a ways from.
Look, the easy way to delineate here is: does this technology need a breakthrough, or does it not? So we don't need any breakthroughs with nuclear reactors. With batteries, we need breakthroughs. And breakthroughs don't happen on a schedule. And so I think people are being disingenuous about this when they talk about these technologies. You should be clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about something that needs a breakthrough. You don't know when that happens.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to pin our planning on. Now, look, I got it wrong.
Right.
I pinned my view on nuclear reactors a long time ago, underestimating the regulatory problem. Right. And so obviously that's a big one, but that's not fundamental in nature. That's just human nature which is probably more intractable. I don't know. But, look, I would love to have a grid scale battery breakthrough. I'm excited about that as you could be. However, I can't, I'm trying to,
I tell you where one area where surprisingly might get us there.
Yeah.
Right. On the battery tech is building bases on the moon. Because you're going to have to develop really good battery tech there. You're going to have solar, and you're going to have, but you are going to have long periods of the lunar night, which you're going to have to use nuclear on the moon. You're going to have to use that as well. But definitely solar and batteries and nuclear would be sort of the combined solution, right?
I mean, look, this is just you and me working on different time horizons. Right, like I work on a 10-year time horizon.
I'm working on 30.
Yeah, and to me, it's like I have to work on things that I think can be real,
commercially viable,
commercially viable on something like a 10-year horizon. So I may seem like I'm a futurist, but I'm working on like dragging things from the future back to that 10-year window.
Yeah,
and doing things on the moon is not that you're describing a scenario that's like demand, like you could say, even if it doesn't even matter what I think about it. If you say it's true, we need it on the moon. That doesn't mean that we're going to get it. We need it here. It doesn't mean we're going to get it. So I don't know that really helps the argument for storage.
Fair enough.
But anyway, I think it's worth calling out that this is something that needs a breakthrough. And And we should look at it that way. And when we should be working on it in that context, like, let's figure out how do we search under every rock and there are cool things, you got these sand batteries, and the first guys who did it didn't get very far, but I know there's people, the Energy Vault or whatever is doing the gravity thing with cranes lifting heavy objects, and it's like CrossFit for cranes or something, making energy storage out of that. I guess that's going pretty well for them. So I don't know what the real answer is, but right now I don't think we have it. And so
No, I agree that there's, but this is the, I guess the challenge is with all of the ideas that we could try, I think we could solve it. But the problem that holds us back from doing lots of really cool next-gen material science development and things like that is often the commercial viability. Whereas if we just said we have to solve this problem and it doesn't matter about the cost, then we'd have a different rate of improvement in some of these areas, right?
Yeah, there really is
I mean, why aren't we as a human species now already optimized on that path versus, and it's a philosophical conversation, but versus, well, let's just go at the pace that the market can accept, because the market's the core driver of decision making here.
Yeah, it's interesting problem because I mean, there's a lot you could say here. Governments, at least where I come from, have been relatively abysmal in my lifetime at doing large scale projects that could help seed a market. You could look at something like Germany took the other side of this. They're so proud of having subsidized solar for so long to get the cost down, to turn it into something that the whole world could do, right?
Yeah. This is, I think, a philosophical conversation. I mean, you spend a lot of time looking at the bleeding edge of technological development and where you can, your sweet spot as a venture capital, as a venture partner and so forth, is that you want to pick that bet that right on that edge of technical feasibility, and we'll be able to get it feasible and then commercialize it, right? But if you didn't have that constraint of, if you just wanted to pick the most bleeding edge stuff that you could get, that you could work out the problem.
Sure.
It could be a pretty interesting world.
Well, I did have that job for 12 years, right? My job was just invent whatever cool we could come up with. Don't worry about commercialization. And we had sort of a 20-year horizon, I guess you could say, because, we would patent those inventions, and you want them to, at some point, be commercialized before the patents expire.
Right.
So I had a longer time horizon in that sense. I was in kind of the window 10 years before a startup, but you could call it a 20-year horizon instead of 10, but still much more practical than, maybe science fiction or something. And I think that
there was still, it was,
I think that
about realistic feasibility.
Yeah, because it's invention.
Right.
We were focused on invention, and I think that that's probably the max window that really makes sense for invention in most cases. Anything earlier than that, I would call it research. If you want.
Who were you working for when you were doing this? Sounds like DARPA.
I was working for Nathan Myhrvold. Okay. So we had a lab for invention. Bill Gates supported a lot of our stuff. He would invent with us. We got 6,000 patents on our own invention there. So it was a large scale invention operation. Yeah, very unique. And I was lucky to be able to do that. But I think that what people don't realize is, all these technologies go through a kind of, life cycle. They gotta start out in, imagination. They gotta end up in research that could take decades to centuries, right?
Yep.
They gotta be, once they make it through research, then there's this stage called invention where it's like, oh, and if you just think of me as an inventor, I'm taking the output of research.
Right.
What's this new, this new chip, this new sensor, this new algorithm, this new material, and does this change anything humans have ever done? And that's invention. That's where you map the superpowers from research to the problems in the world. And we don't really have a functional model for that in the world. Invention is very haphazard. I'm probably the only person even that has a business card that says inventor. It's just not normal. And so we have done a pretty good job of research, lots of room for improvement. We've done a great job with entrepreneurship. That's what comes after invention. And, room for improvement there, of course. But that stuff in the middle, the messy part of invention, that's just like crazy hair and DeLoreans all the way down.
Yeah.
So
now we've got sort of first principles thinking.
Yeah, we've got a framework here. And so I think you want to sort of look at a technology in that context. Is this still in scientific discovery, or is it, in grow and build and grow a market and scale a business, or is it in that invention stage where we still have to figure out how do you adapt the technologies that are coming to solving the problems? And so, I work in that window and increasingly trying to get things out of that window into the entrepreneurship stage. But before, I was more focused on the get things out of R&D into the invention stage, or research into invention stage. So, people are at different parts of that and thrive at different parts of that, but most of the time you can't subvert that. And so a lot of times you're looking at a technology, it still needs research. I get this every day. I get founders who, because a lot of these folks come to me hoping that I can help them, and I hope I can help them. But a lot of them, there's still a research project. They're trying to fund a research project. We can't really do that with venture capital.
No.
They're unfortunately misguided about what venture can do. I wish we could, we can't. So there has to be research, and where the money comes from that varies from.
We are getting more of these philanthropic funds and things like that, but and some funding is going to that, but it's very, very small compared with sort of the larger VC market. Even the crypto market, gets more than that. So
yeah. What do you think is the, if you had to describe where you think the breakdowns are,
well, I think one of the obvious areas that AI is going to help us look at is resource allocation and resource efficiency, right? That's an obvious area to the pattern recognition capabilities of these systems and the sophistication of the systems would lead to conclusion that we can throw them at that problem in terms of energy grid design, in terms of improvements in sanitation, in terms of climate resilience and climate mitigation, that these are problems AI will most likely be pretty good at modeling and helping us with. And also helping us with the tech, building the tech to mitigate and do those, upgrade the system.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of the path. Where it gets tricky is that, if you are looking at next generation healthcare as an example, which would be based on data and would be about preventing problems and also creating potential longevity and health span improvements, things like that, that you have to essentially break the current system to get there, because the mechanisms for achieving healthcare are now dramatically different. They're technology-based rather than, necessarily pharmaceutical-based. Or
how do you think that could happen?
Well, you would have to see a society like China, or Saudi potentially, or Dubai, UAE, adopt that and have very clear success in terms of reducing the cost of national health care while dramatically improving outcomes at the same time. And then it would be a point where all of the socialist, democratic socialist countries and so forth would say, well, this is the most efficient use of taxpayers' funds and it's going to get us better socialized, nationalized healthcare. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Of course we'll do that. and we're going to save money at the same time. There'll be no argument. And then you'll have this wave of improvement where the US will be the last to do it because, you know,
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
yeah, but at least in the industrialized nations. And then, you know, you're rolling that out across the world because the cost of healthcare is plummeting. The ability of AI to diagnose and create new compounds and proteins and gene therapy and all of that means that, good quality healthcare becomes broadly accessible fairly quickly.
It seems
That's an example of a system that
Yeah.
needs to be disrupted to get that outcome. Sorry.
Seems very unlikely to me that even though we have 190 some countries, that even in the ones with the best leadership, they're going to be proactive enough to design this from the top down. You know, it seems like we need, I don't know, I feel like we need like a healthcare DMZ or something, like or free trade zone for biotech or something.
So this is why I mentioned Saudi, because Saudi now has a health data sandbox, right? So they extract every test that's done anywhere in Saudi at a clinic or a hospital is entered into the system.
Oh, cool.
The test results and so forth are there.
Okay.
And you can get a snapshot of that data.
So there's data. Oh, that's cool.
Stripped out of identifying information.
Yeah.
That's tokenized.
Yeah.
It's a pretty advanced blockchain-based system that they're trialing. And, I think it's going to be stuff like that plus commercialization, right? By for AI diagnostics, for example, you're already seeing hospitals incorporate AI diagnostics in oncology because we're getting much better results from, the algorithmic diagnostic stuff than humans, So I think that's going to happen organically.
Yeah.
But
Good.
the medicine approach, the fact that it's now a data-driven approach to health, not we'll give you a medicine to mask the symptoms, we're actually looking at the genetic causes of diseases and trying to edit those genes out, as well as, looking at, mitochondria and how the engines of cells work and cell senescence and all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And we're looking at, therapeutics on that don't fit into the current model of sort of pharmaceutical stuff, highly targeted, personalized to your DNA, things like that. So, and the tech that's driving this is net new tech. So you're talking about net new infrastructure for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
That is going to be competing with the sort of mass market. But at the same time, you do have some mass demand for, look at new compounds like GLP-1s, the semaglutides and this sort of stuff. And the longevity meds and compounds are going to be produced by those organizations. And they're going to be using AI to, like in silico medicine is doing now to create new medicines and compounds. So but it's going to be more of a hybrid system that evolves, I guess.
Yeah, it feels like there's all that stuff is great, but we need a place where you could create a drug, test a drug, deliver a drug, or, any other, not just drug, but any other possible therapy.
Using digital twins, for drug testing, we should be able to get to, a good enough models on that.
We're working on it in two places. One is microbiome.
Yep.
So we have a team that made a gut simulator.
Oh, yeah.
So they can grow your microbiome in a machine, and then they can test drugs on it, diets on it, before we ever do it to you.
That's cool.
And
that's personalized medicine, right?
Yeah, and obviously, like, that doesn't, scale super well, but as they do that, they get more and more data. They learn more and more about all these microbes that are in your gut and which ones do what and all that. And that all goes in giant machine learning models. So eventually we can digital twin it. We can make
combining that with CES, they launched the first smart toilet that can process your output.
Okay. Yeah.
And analyze, your stuff to see and your health. So that could be a way to scale some of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. You want to get there. And I think there's a lot of work to do, thousands of PhDs need to be done to explore these microbes and figure out what they're good for. But
this is where potential highly automated economies with UBI gives us the ability to pursue these things without the commercial constraints that we have today.
Well, that was a wild veer into Albuquerque, but I don't know how you got there, but all right. Sounds good. Let's do it. We should try that somewhere. Puerto Rico, maybe. They basically have UBI already. Let's send them smart toilets and see if it saves the world. Yeah, cool. So what? Oh, so then, we got into way out into healthcare, but the other thing on energy, there were two things you brought up.
That was really talking about resource, improvements in resource allocation, the way the system runs to be more resource efficient, because that becomes it becomes a core driver because of climate, but it also becomes a core driver because it's possible with AI, and so why wouldn't you make it more efficient?
Yeah, my way of thinking about that is, if you think about what are these, what we call AIs, I think of them as computational models, probably just because I'm old. But fundamentally, what do? They're there to take a lot of data and help us use it to make better decisions. And so if you sort of extrapolate and say, all right, well, Excel was there to use data to make better decisions. In our lifetime, Excel was kind of how people did that. Now, Excel is essentially obsolete.
Yep.
You use a machine learning model that has all the data about your business, and it helps you make a better decision. And within the next couple of years, every business will be running off of some kind of model.
Yeah, they helps agents and
and so. And it's not hard to imagine that if that all works, then a century from now, governments would do it too.
Yes.
And they'll have models that help them say, well, hey, if we pass this 800-page bill that no congressman has ever read, what might happen? We could sort of have the AIs.
Well, if you
tell us
to automate the process of government, which conceivably you must, because all the corporations are doing it. So taxpayers and the industry is going to demand the government does it as well.
That's
right.
Well, that's optimally, yes.
Optimally.
I mean, there's lots of things people
of
their governments that they don't get.
Yeah.
But
look, we've had e-services. A number of countries have done that very well. Dubai does it extraordinarily well.
Yeah, sure.
Estonia does it well. China does it well, although some in the West would argue that's the surveillance state working. But the point is that we are seeing this happen in some locations, but it's not universal.
Mm-hmm.
So this sort of adaptation is going to be
it's super interesting.
Fragmented.
One, because you can see it's basically just like IT from the 90s proven for a small government, or even large one in the case of China. So why are we not copying that? Why wouldn't every country say, oh yeah, obviously that's better, let's do it? It's so fascinating, how much bullshit there must be to keep a government from internalizing what's obviously working really well. So fascinating.
But I mean, we see evidence of this all the time.
So do you want to talk about fusion reactors?
Yeah, so let's finish with fusion. Or do you want to talk about microwave
okay, let's do that. So
we always
the escape. It's the best though. If you the escape hatch for solar panels, to make me love them again, is you roll them up, stick them in a starship, launch them into space. It looks like it's nighttime in space because we have a bad angle on it.
Yeah.
The truth is, it's like noon in space all the time. So a solar panel in space would get 8 times as much energy as it does on Earth. It would get sun 24 hours a day. And then it can beam that energy down to Earth using radio waves, microwaves, 10 gigahertz microwave. That's a frequency that basically goes right around water molecules. So in the atmosphere, it just goes straight through clouds in the middle of the night, no flakes, whatever. And you have a big antenna on the ground that would receive it. And so it's a way to turn solar panels into baseload energy. And it sounds crazy, sounds like science fiction, essentially was science fiction for our whole lifetime, but
it's technically feasible.
it's not only technically feasible, it's actually easier than nuclear reactors. We have all the tech to do it.
Yeah.
The only
And with
problem,
the low-cost Starship option and Blue Origin coming
yeah,
along.
exactly right. Yeah, its launch cost is the problem. And launch cost, ironically, has crashed. So now we're at this stage where it's cost effective to do this. And it's getting better every day. So to me, this is one that I didn't want to like until I started being forced to run the numbers by a team that wants to do it. And they convinced me a couple years ago that this is not only possible, but wildly practical. And so they're aggressively working on developing this company called Virtus Solis. And their plan is to build the first commercial array in 4 years.
Wow.
Which, is not decades, it's like now. And so anyway, I'm really excited about that one. You can beam the power to the middle of Africa, to Greenland if you want, to the poles, wherever you want energy, you just aim a beam there. And then it's DC, it goes straight on the grid. So you don't need storage, you don't need transmission lines, you could beam it to every city that needs power. And so
these are geostationary orbit?
they're not, they're
geosynchronous
geosynchronous.
or geosynchronous?
Yeah, they're geosynchronous. They're way the hell out there. So not LEO, not in LEO, not close to Earth where communication satellites are, where the space junk is.
Because they've got to be at a point where they can see the sun 24 hours a day.
Exactly right. And so they orbit Earth. I think
Polar orbits?
You actually have a series of orbits at different different angles because you want
eccentric ones, right?
because you want to be able to send power everywhere on Earth in redundant fashion. So with 3 satellites, they can do redundant power to any one place on Earth.
Wow.
With
only 3.
With 18, they could do power to everywhere on Earth all the time. Redundant power everywhere on Earth. So it gets pretty exciting because this will be cheaper than coal. It'll happen.
And the antennas that collect that energy, do they look like satellite dishes?
No, they're just rectennas. So you don't need to see them. You just have to have a field of them. And the field is big. The field is probably 2 kilometers diameter.
Right.
And the reason for that is they spec the beam to be half the energy density of sunshine.
Right.
So if you go stand in front of the beam, you'll get warm eventually, like if you stand in the sunshine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't hurt you. That frequency won't penetrate your skin more than like 1/10 of a millimeter. So it doesn't hurt birds or wildlife or planes or drones or anything else.
And it's clean.
Yeah. And it's totally clean. So that's an exciting one. And it's much more practical and near term than people realize. Yeah.
Well, that's the perfect way to end this, Pablos, because we always want to sort of get a bit futuristic, but it also teaches us that there have been moments in human history where, we've sort of seen this thing on science fiction and dreamed it wouldn't be possible for hundreds of years. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, we have this technical innovation that allows us to be suddenly achievable,
Yeah, I think that experience is kind of true every time.
Yeah.
And we internalize them pretty quickly. It's sort of strange, as for all the resistance people have to new things, as soon as it's real and they try it and use it, it becomes normal to them almost overnight. And so, we have to make these things happen the first time. But one thing to think about, I think, is like all these technologies. There's almost no technology that humans invented and developed and made cost effective and proved that it worked, and then decide not to use it.
Yeah.
The technology.
Right track.
except for 8-track was amazing. No, which the technology always wins in the long run.
Right.
And so there's this kind of, growing pains, like whoever invented the wheel was probably assassinated. And then, we kill off everybody with a wheel for a couple of centuries until the kids were like, you dad, wheels are cool. And the next thing you know, we're in a world where just obviously we use the wheel and we don't think about it. And every G kind of has to go through that. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes longer than others, but we get there eventually. And it's exciting to see that in our lifetime, so many of these things are going to start to cross there.
And AI will speed that up.
AI speeds everything up.
Yeah.
It's been exciting.
Well, thank you for visiting during your trip in Bangkok.
No, thanks. And thanks for dinner and thanks for hanging out.
It's
exciting to see what you have going here.
Good to have you back on the show.
Yeah.
And we will have you back on later in the year for the launch of your new book.
The book,
What's the working title?
the book is called Deep Future. That's the actual title. Deep Future is also the name of my venture fund and podcast. So
Sounds like a heavy metal band as well.
and an upcoming heavy metal band. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, man.
Thanks for catching up.
Cool.
Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.